Call the Shadow Minister, Andrew Rosindell.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and it is a privilege, as always, to serve under your chairmanship, and I'm pleased to speak to the amendments in my name and to those of His Majesty's Government, and I thank the Minister for her very detailed explanation of the bill, which I'm sure we all agree has been extremely helpful this evening. Madam Chairman, this bill is a significant measure and one that commands broad support across the House. In plain English, the aims of the bill, if implemented correctly, could play a major part in protecting the 2/3 of our planet that lie beyond any one nation's control. As I said at second reading, the United Kingdom has a proud record of global leadership in ocean conservation. Our island nation boasts the greatest maritime explorers and conservationists in history. And I believe that we have always seen the oceans, which after all have been key to our national and international success story, as treasures which require protection. But, as with all international frameworks, even those that are without controversy, and especially those which confer upon our ministers prerogative powers, the details really do matter. The amendments that His Majesty's opposition are proposing are by no means intended to undermine the bill. Rather, they seek to strengthen it by ensuring that Parliament remains properly informed, that ministerial powers are exercised accountably, and that the new regulatory burdens placed on British science and industry are managed in a proportionate way. The first of my amendments relate to Clause 7, which deals with reporting requirements under Clauses 5 and 6 of the bill. Those clauses concern, respectively, priorities of marine genetic resources and databases of digital sequence information. As drafted, Clause 7 requires a separate report to be provided to the Secretary of State every 2 years from each repository and each database, detailing the number of times samples or data have been accessed, viewed or downloaded. Our amendment, simple though it may seem, would allow those two reports to be combined into a single report, provided that all the necessary information is fully included. It is a modest step to reduce duplication and unnecessary bureaucracy. Many institutions, whether they be our universities, the Natural History Museum, the National Oceanography Centre, amongst many other institutions in this country, will operate both repositories and databases. It makes no sense to me to require two separate reports when a single consolidated report could serve exactly the same function. The scientists of our island home lead the world in marine biodiversity research. We should ensure that compliance with this new regime is as straightforward as possible, while still meeting our obligations under the agreement. The amendment therefore aims to strike a sensible balance between upholding the requisite protections prescribed by the treaty, whilst also ensuring that we do not unnecessarily hinder our researchers, especially those belonging to smaller enterprises or university projects, and I hope the Minister will view it in that way. The second amendment I wish to speak to introduce a new clause, which is new clause 1, entitled Powers of the Secretary of State Review. This clause would require the Secretary of State, within 3 years of the Act coming into force, to lay before Parliament a report on the exercise of the powers conferred by the bill. The report would describe how those powers have been used, for what purposes, and crucially, how effectively they have been implemented. It would also assess whether the use of those powers has aligned with the objectives of the international agreement itself. And so, Madam Chairman, we live in a nation where Parliament is sovereign. And whilst I respect that this is not a unique case, nevertheless, Parliament is owed the right to proper scrutiny. The bill grants extensive powers to the Secretary of State, powers to make regulations that could amend primary legislation, impose civil sanctions, and even create new offences. Clause 9 and 11 in particular confer broad regulatory authority to implement future decisions of the International Conference of the Parties. It is entirely appropriate, Madam Chairman, that Parliament should have the opportunity, after a period of operation, to review how those powers have been used. We have seen in other fields that delegated powers can expand far beyond what Parliament originally intended. And so a statutory review clause would ensure that we learn from experience and, if necessary, recalibrate. It would also enhance trust, and I think trust in the treaty itself. The general public and indeed Parliament want assurance that international obligations are implemented both in the interests that they have been set out by international agreements, but also, importantly, in our own national interest, and that the government remain answerable to this House for the way in which they do so. A report after 3 years, I believe, is hardly an onerous expectation and would create a constructive means of evaluating whether the mechanisms in this bill are working as intended, and it would, I believe, strengthen rather than hinder the effectiveness of this legislation. And so the third amendment concerns Clause 12, which sets out the procedure for regulations under Clause 11. Clause 11 allows the Secretary of State to make regulations in response to decisions taken by the Conference of the Parties under the agreement, including in relation to area-based management tools, such as marine protected areas and emergency measures under Article 24. Clause 11(3)(c) specifically allows the Secretary of State to charge fees in connection with the exercise of functions under those regulations. However, as currently drafted, the bill does not require those fee-setting regulations to be subject to the affirmative resolution procedure. And so our amendment would correct that. It would ensure that any regulations enabling the Minister to set fees are subject to a level of parliamentary scrutiny. Fees are, Madam Chairman, in effect a form of taxation. They may affect universities, research institutes and private companies engaged in marine science or biotechnology. The sums may not be vast, but they are nevertheless material. It is only right that Parliament should have the chance to debate and, if necessary, amend or reject such regulations before they take effect. The affirmative procedure is a reasonable safeguard, and I hope the Government will agree. Finally, Madam Chairman, I turn to new Clause 2, requiring biennial reporting of the implementation and enforcement of the Act. Under this proposal, the Secretary of State would be required to lay before Parliament a report every 2 years, beginning with 2 years of enactment, detailing how the Act is being implemented and enforced. The report would include data on access to samples and digital sequence information, information on the number and nature of the enforcement actions, and assessment of the Act's impact on business, on scientific research, and on the fishing industry, a summary of any regulatory changes made under the Act, and an assessment of the impact of those changes. The intent is to keep Parliament and the public informed about how this complex framework is working in practice. Madam Chairman, this bill touches upon sensitive and wide-ranging interests: environmental protection, scientific innovation, intellectual property and economic activity on the high seas. It is, of course, right that we protect biodiversity, but we must also ensure that the UK remains a place where science and enterprise can flourish as it has always done before. Regular reporting will help us understand whether the balance is being struck correctly. Are our scientists able to conduct research without being bogged down in excessive paperwork? Are our marine industries able to operate competitively while meeting environmental standards? These are questions that need to be answered. Are our enforcement agencies adequately resourced? Another important question the Minister needs to reassure the House on. These are legitimate questions, Madam Chairman, that will inevitably deserve answers. I believe such transparency would also demonstrate leadership internationally. The UK has always prided itself on being a model of good governance. By voluntarily reporting on our own implementation of the agreement, we can encourage other nations to do likewise. I should also mention the position of the overseas territories and Crown dependencies. Clause 24 allows this bill to be extended to the overseas territories, and the government amendment would permit extension to the Crown dependency of the Isle of Man. I thank the honourable member for Rotherham for already mentioning this in her remarks earlier. These jurisdictions often have unique marine environments and, more importantly, unique constitutional arrangements, so any extension must be preceded by full consultation. I hope the Minister can give assurances today that such consultation will take place before any orders are made, and that the Government will work with the governments of the Crown dependencies and overseas territory administrations, who are elected governments of our wider British family, to tailor the regime to their circumstances. In conclusion, Madam Chairman, our amendments share the aim of strengthening this bill through proportionate oversight and clear accountability to Parliament and the British public. They would ensure that Parliament remains properly informed, that ministerial powers are exercised transparently, and that our world-leading scientists and industries can comply with the new regime without unnecessary bureaucratic burden. Far from hindering the bill, they would bolster its credibility and effectiveness, supporting both our international obligations and, crucially, our British national interests. It is on that basis that I commend my amendments to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time, and I call the Shadow Minister, Andrew Rosindell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for guiding this bill through Parliament, and also echo her thanks to all those involved in the passage of this bill, and to say how pleased I am that it's been of a cross-party nature, which is as it should be. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to, on behalf of His Majesty's Opposition, state my support for the core purpose of this bill. It is right that we act to safeguard the biodiversity of the high seas. It is right that we promote the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from marine generic resources, and right that we establish clear assessment and management tools to prevent harm to the ocean environment. It was on this basis that the previous Conservative government, as acknowledged, played a key role in negotiating the treaty in the first place. The United Kingdom should meet the obligations prescribed in this treaty with the leadership for which we are known around the world. As an island nation with a proud maritime heritage stretching back centuries, we understand better than most nations the value and the vulnerability of our oceans. However, while this bill enables us to fulfil our treaty commitments, it also assigns wide-ranging powers to ministers, implement future decisions taken by international bodies, decisions which could in time have significant implications for British science, industry and innovation. And so Parliament must be able to retain the ability to scrutinise, question and, where appropriate, challenge the use of these powers. That is the spirit behind the amendments we just brought forward, and it reflects the fundamental principle that international cooperation must never come at the expense of proper democratic oversight in this House. Madam Deputy Speaker, the United Kingdom's record as a custodian of the seas is long established, strengthened by the extraordinary biodiversity of our overseas territories. The Blue Belt Initiative, which includes many of our territories such as Pitcairn, Anguilla, South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, the Falkland Islands, and indeed the British Indian Ocean Territory, has rightly made Britain a global leader in marine protection. And I therefore welcome the bill's application to the overseas territories in Clause 20, and now through the Government's amendment to Clause 24 to the Isle of Man. Although, Madam Deputy Speaker, it must be said again that proper consultation with those territories and dependencies is essential and has been starkly absent from the Government's shameful handling of the Chagos Islands. Our overseas territories are part of the British family, and they deserve to be treated with respect and consideration that such a relationship demands. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, the challenge of protecting the oceans is not a partisan one, nor do I think it is subject to open conflict between nation states. Our seas sustain every nation, and the success of such cooperation on the high seas will depend on the integrity of domestic implementation. If we are to lead internationally, then our own house must be firmly put in order first. And that is what we are doing in passing this bill. As we send this bill to the other place, I hope the Government will reflect on the constructive contributions made from across this House and ensure that the final bill upholds both our environmental responsibilities and our democratic principles. Britain can and must lead by example. Madam Deputy Speaker, we owe it to future generations to get this right. And as Sir David Attenborough says, if we save the sea, we save our world.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. As the contrary, no? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. That concludes business on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction bill committee and remaining stages. I'll give the front benches a